The week passed under the sign of several events. For Ukraine, it was a clarification of relations between Zaluzhny and Zelensky. For Europe, the long-awaited approval of aid to Ukraine in the amount of €50 billion. For the United States, the anticipation of the Biden administration's decision on Iran. And for Russia, as befits a zone tossing and turning on the sidelines, the main event was the discussion possible extradition of the Baitu group from Thailand at the request of Consul Sosnov. By the way, this Sosnov successfully monetized his position by opening a company selling foreign passports for his wife. In general, as a result of the butting, the group was sent to Israel, where the musician's ordeal ended. The conflict between Zelensky and Zaluzhny reached a new level on Thursday evening when CNN published a text by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, in which he outlined his strategic vision for the development of the war. Until now, Zelensky claimed that Zaluzhny had no plan for waging war, but now it turns out that there is a plan, and the whole point is in the political leadership, which does not fully adequately assess what is happening. Zaluzhny's text answers the question, what does the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine propose? All that remains is to wait for Zelensky's reaction, who will be forced to make his move. The world also watched the Biden administration's response to the terrorist attack on an American base in Jordan. Pentagon Chief Austin on Thursday, responding to a question about why the United States has not yet responded to this strike, said, "It's time to deprive them of even more potential than before. We want to hold accountable the people who are responsible for this," he said. "And we also want to make sure that we continue to disempower them as we move forward." And it became clear that the decision had been made, and the United States would launch its strikes on Iranian targets in the very near future. The EU summit, held on February 1, finally put an end to the issue of allocating €50 billion in aid to Ukraine. Orban was forced to retreat before the onslaught of the heads of 26 European countries. However, he managed to fray his nerves and delayed the decision for a sufficient period of time so the Kremlin can be happy. And they can also admire the obedience of the inhabitants of the cattle station, who rushed to praise the spoiler candidate Nadezhdin. It doesn't occur to the slaves that he is an ordinary spoiler, replacing the beloved Sobchak. And Navalny, as befits an agent, again called for people to come to the vote, but to stick it in the stump for anyone, but not for Putin. This legitimator of the fascist regime has long been turned into a toggle switch system. It must be turned on. The mechanism for manipulating non-escorts is debugged and works flawlessly. A telephone survey of Blundarians showed that 60% of respondents believe that the event will be held fairly. This is not even stupidity, this is complete degradation. It is clear that the collective West recognizes the rebirth of a rat as illegitimate, after which they will completely stop talking to the cave, except on the topic of war. An angry bear growl will be heard from inside, and a strong group will be trampling around outside, armed to the teeth in case a rabid beast crawls out. Putin doesn't have much time. He needs a break before everything falls apart. There are only a few days left before the first plane crash of a civilian airliner. Airplanes break down so often that every flight can become a potential kamikaze flight. And after the first such catastrophe, the gates to hell will open. And this is not to mention the elevators, which will also begin to collapse along with the passengers. Nabialina holds on to the diagram with all her strength, pretending that nothing catastrophic is happening, although in fact everything has already happened, and this train, flying towards the cliff, can no longer be stopped. The stop valve does not work. It is unknown how Putin will survive until Stump's day. One thing is absolutely certain. Immediately after the re-establishment, he will be forced to close the zone, harshly reformat the internet into Jabernet and declare mobilization, because he will play the card of attack on Russian Kaliningrad, which means war with NATO and the West. He needs re-establishment only in order to gain official support from the population and point numbers towards the West. You see, I have carte blanche from the people. Mandate of absolute trust. I am the king. Thus, participation in this fascist event, no matter where it takes place, turns all voters into customers of the big war, into its co-authors and co-founders, and collective responsibility after it becomes inevitable. It is obvious even now, but after the March stumps it will become historically fixed. Ukraine has outlined the price of war that Russia must pay today: $1 trillion. It is clear that this does not take into account the damage that the racists will inflict on Ukraine in the future. After all, they are not going to retreat. In response to this figure, the Kremlin only squeals about the illegality of confiscating Russian assets frozen abroad, threatening in response to squeeze out Western assets stuck in the cave, the value of which could reach $288 billion. In principle, when cooperating with the post-Soviet countries, Western businesses should have understood where poking around. But they so wanted to get their piece of the pie in the huge market of savages that thoughts of risks overshadowed expectations of profit. So don't feel sorry. Cut the furry pieces, cut them. As the Kremlin ramps up nuclear hysteria, the UK will launch a nuclear missile from a submarine in the Atlantic Ocean for the first time since 2016. The test is scheduled for February 4. And this is also an indicative attraction for Putin, who must make sure that everything flies for the Britons, and if necessary, it will certainly arrive. And at this time Putin is tearing up and rushing around, imprisoning the developers of his hypersonic missiles, which turned out to be nothing. 12 eggheads have already been arrested, and this is far from the end. Investigators report personally to Putin on how the investigation is progressing, and the task is not to find the culprits, but to imprison several people in each institute. The Russians were already hooked on sleeping pills after the invasion of Ukraine, but here they will probably need to increase the dosage. For harsh years go away, others come after them. They will also be difficult. Hope in Trump, of course, warms the boys, but in the USA, unlike the Wild Zone, there are elections, and they are fair. But the worst thing is that they are unpredictable. And the damn Supreme Court can lower the barrier in front of the red toe of the favorite, and Nikki Haley will go instead from the Republicans. It is impossible to come to an agreement with this stubborn Reaganite, and she is capable of turning the campaign around in such a way that it will become very difficult for the elderly Biden. Putin understands that his main resource time is running out. He, accustomed to playing for a long time, wrapping his opponent's intestines around his fist, found himself in severe time trouble. And in such conditions, he will have to operate with the resource that he has: poor quality live meat, worn-out infrastructure, some remnants of Soviet equipment, including missiles. And, of course, propaganda. But its termites devoured the zone from the inside, leaving a fairly rickety facade, behind which obedient masses roam like somnambulists, ready to go anywhere on orders. Moreover, their path always has a final stop at the cemetery. And only the devil knows when Zonov's train will approach her.